Spanish is different in different places. And I think sometimes as a student, you learn things that are said in Spain. And then my reality has been, that's not really something that Latin American students say. If anybody is wondering if Spanish 55 is for them, I would encourage them to do the free trial lesson, because that was what really got me interested. And working with Coach Francis has been a blessing, and she has just helped me become so much more confident in my ability to speak Spanish. Go Coach Francis. One of my biggest misconceptions years ago was you don't know Spanish or you do. It's black or white. And you're either fluent or you're not. And I'm really learning that fluency is a journey. And I'll even tell this to my students who ask, so you can speak Spanish? And I'll explain to them, yes, my grammar's not always perfect, but I can speak Spanish. I think it's a really valuable thing to know more than one language. And I think Spanish is the most valuable if you're going to stay in the United States. If there are adults out there who think I'm too old to start learning a language, it's much easier if you're a kid. I think it's not too late. What I've learned is that consistency pays off in many areas of life, but I think one of the best things I did was just taking the jump to try to improve my Spanish. And over 3 years have passed, and I'm surprised how quickly it's gone in working with Coach Francis. And I think, yes, life gets busy, but making sure I'm prioritizing this. I meet with Coach Francis once a week, and it's just paid off so much.
Hola a todos, welcome back to Conquering Spanish, the podcast where we celebrate the power of language learning. I'm your host, Tanya Roman, the Student Success Manager at Spanish 55. As a former language teacher, I've enjoyed getting to know countless students on their language journeys, and having learned Spanish, French, and English, I understand firsthand the challenges and rewards of language acquisition. This podcast explores the inspiring stories of our Spanish 55 students. Our guests share their personal experiences, offering valuable tips and takeaways from their journey with Spanish. Each story will inspire and guide you as you continue your path to conquer Spanish. In this episode, we're thrilled to have Mary Herman join us. Mary is an elementary school teacher from Pennsylvania who has long loved Spanish. She uses Spanish to connect with her students and their families and is a passionate traveler. Mary has been a valuable member of our Spanish 55 community for over 3 years. Join us as we chat with Mary about her journey, her experiences as a teacher, and how Spanish has enriched her life. Welcome, Mary. We're so excited to have you here today with us. Okay, Mary, so we know you're a teacher, you're from Pennsylvania, but can you please tell our audience something that nobody really knows about you?
Sure. I'll start with when I was a child. I was really fortunate to have Spanish starting when I was a kindergartner, which was unique because I did grow up in central Pennsylvania where I live now. And so I had basic Spanish lessons starting in kindergarten, and I chose to continue through middle school and high school as electives. And so I felt like I was learning Spanish from a young age, which was great, even if it was just the colors and numbers and things like that. And when I was about 8 years old, my family, who lived on a farm, I grew up on a farm, we had neighbors move in nearby, and they were from Uruguay. And my whole family, I remember my parents especially felt bad for them because it was difficult to move into a community that was predominantly English speaking. And so we wanted to do things with them. And it was hard because they only knew Spanish. And the two kids in the family learned English a lot more quickly than the parents did because they were in school and exposed to so much English. And we just kept wanting to learn more and more to communicate with them. And so I think that my neighbors from Uruguay, who no longer live in Pennsylvania, would be my original inspiration for wanting to get better and better at Spanish.
And so you started speaking Spanish with them, and how long were you neighbors for?
We were probably neighbors for, I'm going to say, 8 years before the family moved to Florida to pursue some other opportunities. And we still kept in touch with them, and they continue to be an inspiration, even if I don't talk to them often.
Okay, that's wonderful. These childhood friendships are the ones that, usually spark something in us, and they make us take different paths, right? And so I want to ask you about your experiences learning Spanish as a kindergartner. Do you remember what it felt like? I'm just curious to know what was it like for, you as a young child starting to learn a different language?
I think it felt exciting, and it was a lot of song based learning, and we would chant things. And so now, as a teacher myself, I really wish that my students were able to have Spanish. We keep advocating for it. I really wish that my students would be learning Spanish starting in kindergarten, because I think it also normalizes learning another language. Some people here in the United States only know English, and that's okay. But I think it's a really valuable thing to know more than one language. And I think Spanish is the most valuable if you're going to stay in the United States.
Right. And what do you find valuable about learning a language?
I think it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. I know there have been times I've spoken to someone and it hasn't gone perfectly. Most people appreciate your effort, even if your grammar isn't correct, which is often the case. But I also think it just gives you the ability to communicate with someone else, and that's valuable. I think in my community, sometimes I'll walk into Walmart and hear someone
Mhm.
speaking Spanish, and
Mhm.
as a teacher, I've helped to translate for families at my school, and it's it's always a rewarding experience when you're able to make someone feel more welcome.
Yeah, I bet. And what countries are your students from?
I've had students from a lot of different countries, a lot
Mhm.
from Puerto Rico, a lot from Mexico, many Central and South American countries. So
Mhm.
that's also been very interesting for me, and something that I've definitely learned, especially in terms of accents. Spanish is different in different places. And
Yes.
I think sometimes as a student, you learn things that are said in Spain. And then
Mhm.
my reality has been that's not really something that Latin American students say.
Of course.
So that's been a learning experience. And I've always thought of it as just the various forms of English we hear in the United States, someone with a deep Southern accent or someone with a New York accent. And it sounds different. And the words are even sometimes different. There's different
Yes.
slang. And so I've sometimes found Puerto Rican Spanish to be a little bit difficult to understand with the accent. And it's something I can laugh about. And students have taught me different words. And so it's makes me want to continue learning more about each specific area.
Yeah, and I think that's something really important because language and each accent not only teaches you vocabulary and slang as you mentioned, but it opens up the door to each particular culture, right? So each time that you have these exchanges with your students, with their families, it's like you are diving deeper and deeper into what they value and their history and whatnot. So I think that's the beauty of learning different languages. There's deeper connection with others.
Estoy de acuerdo.
Muy bien, Mari. Muy bien. And so I want to ask you, how long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher for 9 years,
Okay,
third
and
grade the whole time.
really, third graders. And what motivated you to become a teacher?
I've always enjoyed working with children, and my mom was a kindergarten teacher for over 36 years. She recently retired, and so I had a lot of experience helping her in her classroom and just seeing what she did for her students. So she was my inspiration, the person who inspired me to become a teacher, and I've enjoyed it.
Okay. And in your classroom, have you ever had the opportunity to speak Spanish to your students? I know you mentioned that you guys are advocating to have a Spanish program, but do you have any words that you use with them at all, or just in particular cases?
I think more particular cases, when I have Hispanic students, I like to communicate with them in Spanish, even if it's asking about their weekend or something, one of their interests. But occasionally kids will say, how do you say this in Spanish? And I'll be able to tell them more a greeting, hola, or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, usually these words that they need so that they can communicate with their friends, right? So you're
Yes.
in a way helping bridge communication between others. So that's wonderful, Mary. I want to take you now from kindergarten, your journey learning Spanish when you were 8 years old till now, right? Did you? I know you minored in Spanish when you were in college. What else or where else have you tried learning Spanish?
I was really fortunate to have an opportunity during college to travel over a winter break to Costa Rica and Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went with a group from my university and we did some service work while we were there, and it was really eye opening. I actually remember returning back to the United States, and when I finally got home and my mom picked me up, I was just crying. I was so overwhelmed by what I saw, especially in Nicaragua. And it was my first experience having been outside of the country, other than venturing just a little bit into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a really eye opening experience. And I felt like I was forever changed in a good way. I'll never forget that experience. And it's easily one of the top 5 things I did when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And having grown up, not traveling a whole lot. My dad was a farmer, so that tied my family down quite a bit. My mom did take my brothers and I on some smaller trips, especially to see family, but I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
even on an airplane until I was 19 years old. So it was definitely eye opening and made me want to continue to learn Spanish, to continue to be able to travel and see other people and communicate with them.
Right. And what was your favorite moment from any of these two trips that you'd like to share with us?
The ability to speak to families there and people we were working with, students. We stayed at an orphanage in Nicaragua while we were there, the group I was with, and just to be able to try Spanish and see,
Mm-hmm.
is what we're learning something we can actually use, and it was. And so the joy that it brought people to see that we learned Spanish
Mm-hmm.
was really touching, because I think a lot of them just looking at us maybe assumed we didn't know Spanish. And some people on the trip did not, but those of us who did know, when we tried to use Spanish, even if it wasn't perfect, people were really happy about that.
You mentioned something really important, the fact that it might not be perfect and nothing ever is. So I think what's valuable is actually just having the courage to try and just communicate with others.
I agree with that, Tanya. I'm a bit of a perfectionist by nature. I like to be really organized, and so for me it's also a growing opportunity, because like you said, it's not perfect. And I think one of
Mm-hmm.
my biggest misconceptions years ago was, you either you don't know Spanish or you do. It's
Mm.
black or white.
Right.
And you're either fluent or you're not. And I'm really learning that fluency is a journey. And I'll even tell this to my students who ask, so you can speak Spanish? And I'll explain to them, yes, my grammar's not always perfect, but I can speak Spanish. And I think I'm realizing it's you're never quite done learning. You're never
Mm-hmm.
quite done improving your Spanish, and it just you keep working at it.
Yeah, that's correct. And fluency does not mean perfection. It means getting your point across and getting others to understand you and you understanding them. And it doesn't matter whether, it's with basic vocabulary or grammar or with a bit more advanced ones, but as long as the point has gotten across, then that's a certain type of fluency. So I think it's really important for any language learner to remember that.
I agree. And it's really good for me as a teacher now to put myself in the position of a learner, because I sometimes struggle. Coach Francis, who I work with, is phenomenal. I just want to keep working with her forever. She's so good and such a great teacher. And sometimes she'll challenge me in a good way. And it's important for me to be in that seat of the learner, because I realize what it's like to be struggling through something the subjunctive, something like
Oh my
that.
goodness, the famous subjunctive.
Yes. And so Francis is very patient with me, and I hope that I display that same patience with my students and remember what it's like to be learning something that's hard.
That's wonderful, and I'm really happy to hear that you're taking some of your experiences in Spanish and taking it to the classroom. And it's really important to always be learners, especially if you're a teacher, because sometimes when you're a teacher, it's easy to forget what others feel when they're learning. I want to ask you now about the challenges you might have faced while learning Spanish, because we know that learning any language is a roller coaster, right? You have some good days when you feel like you're really fluent, other days where, it seems like you never learned anything at all. So what have some of these challenges been for you?
I definitely have experienced challenges. And one is when I have been trying to communicate with someone and it's not going as well as I would like. I remember speaking to a parent on the phone, and I just could not understand what the parent was saying. And I asked the parent to repeat what was being said, and I just couldn't understand. And I apologized. And when I hung up from the phone call, I felt a little bit like a failure. I thought, I wasn't able to translate well. And one thing is for sure, it is much easier to translate in person when you can see someone as opposed to over a phone call where there might have been some background noise or some other hindrance from my understanding. But anytime I'm struggling to communicate is something that can make me feel a bit self-conscious about learning Spanish. Another thing that comes to mind is just when I'm working with Coach Francis and we're going over something and I think, I know she's taught me this, but it's not there. So sometimes when I'm working with Coach Francis and there's a concept that I know she's taught me and I feel bad, I think, I know we learned this, I know this word, but it's not coming to my mind. It can be a bit of a frustration and I sometimes feel bad. I think, I know I learned it.
And how do you deal with this frustration of maybe, not being able to come up with the word, or when you feel you're not understanding the other person? How do you deal with this?
Sometimes I'll try to say something in a different way. I'll kind of talk around the word that I'm missing to try to get my point across. Sometimes it will motivate me to go back later and look something up. Or even in the moment, if I have a translator handy, what is that word? And just pulling out my translator. Sometimes it's a matter of if it's related to self-confidence. I've had a couple mentors, including Coach Francis, and there's a teacher at my school who's an ESL teacher, and she is a native English speaker, but knows Spanish and several other languages. And she and I have talked a lot about what you and I talked about, Tanya, that language learning is a lifelong journey. And she's sometimes said, you can only do the best you can. And she's made me feel a lot better about moments of struggle.
Wow. That you mentioned something so important, having a mentor, having somebody who guides you and who, walks you through these rough patches. How long have you had her as a mentor?
Couple years. She started working at my school a couple years after I did. And I remember when she first arrived, I thought, she speaks Spanish. This is great. And so she and I will sometimes help each other if we're doing translations for someone in the school, just to say, does this make sense? What do you think of this? And she's just somebody who I feel like she's a good person to go to when I have a struggle, because she understands. She's lived abroad for many years in various countries, and she just gets it. So sometimes I think other people, when they hear you speak Spanish, they think, again, that black and white, you either do or you don't. And they assume, okay, everything will go perfectly. And I don't know that they fully understand in the way she does, where she's actually went through the process of learning many languages.
That is so important. And to help, stay on track and not to ever think, maybe it's not for me. And have you ever had any of these moments where you say, Spanish might not be for me, I might not want to continue?
I have had doubts. And I think before I joined Spanish 55 and started working with Coach Francis, those moments were more frequent because I would give up. I remember I purchased some workbooks where I would do exercises, and it was a lot of changing verb tenses, and there was an answer key in the back, so I could always do a page, check my work, and it was my goal one year to do a page a day, and I was doing those things, but it wasn't helping me as much as talking to someone. So I kind of just started out looking for this opportunity. I thought, who can I find in my community? There are Hispanic people around. I thought, who can I just say, hey, can I talk to you? But it also was in the time right after the pandemic had hit, and a lot of people were not comfortable meeting up with people. So I was looking for an opportunity, and I just, thanks to a Google search, I stumbled upon Spanish 55. And I thought it was really nice that there was a free trial lesson offered. I thought, okay, I have nothing to lose. Might as well try it. And so I was paired right away with Coach Francis, and I liked it. And so that I was motivated to continue because my first free lesson went so well.
And what have you loved the most about your lessons with Coach Francis?
I've really enjoyed, I would say, two things. One, getting to know her. She's
Right.
such a wonderful person. And so she's asked me about things when I got married 2 summers ago. She was so excited to hear about my wedding. I sent her some photos, and I've been excited to hear about some things going on in her life. And so I've really enjoyed getting to know her as a person. And I feel like we are friends now. And I've also liked that she really does tailor the lessons to me. She knows I'm a teacher. So we've done a lot of work with
Right.
school vocabulary and different things that I've always wondered how to say, but I've never quite known what the best phrasing was. And sometimes translators will spit out something that doesn't sound natural. So she's worked a lot with me, really tailored the lessons to me, which is exactly what I wanted. And if she'll always say, is there something you'd like to work on? One time I wanted to work on more vocabulary related to sports. My husband likes to watch sports, and sometimes we're watching the Phillies games, and I'll see the Phillies translator come onto the field. So we were working on some sports vocabulary, and she's worked on some medical vocabulary because sometimes students feel sick, and how do you respond to that? So she's always willing to do anything that I would like to know more about, and then things that I don't even know I need. A lot of practice with the subjunctive or past tense or future tense. And so she'll throw in some grammar, things that I didn't know I needed.
Yeah, Coach Francis is wonderful, and as you mentioned, she's a great person. She's, so nice, so peaceful, and I think she conveys that in her lessons and makes each lesson so enjoyable, which is what is needed to actually learn. You need to feel safe and you need to have fun, and I think all of that is achieved with her. And I want to ask you, Mary, what other goals would you like to achieve in regards to Spanish?
I want to just continue to improve my fluency. So every time I work with Francis, I'm learning and practicing something new, reviewing some things that I've already maybe mastered, but I'm getting even better. And so my goal is to be able to communicate without having to think so hard. Especially with parents and students at my school and anyone I come across who speaks Spanish, to really feel confident. So Coach Francis helps me feel more confident in my abilities, and I want to just continue getting better, especially with some of the tricky grammar, and feel really good about speaking Spanish with others.
So we know the subjunctive is tricky. Any other tricky grammar aspects?
I think anytime I'm trying to match, for example, adjectives to nouns, it has to, maybe I understand it, but I need more practice to get to a point where it just clicks instantly. So just those little prepositions and all kinds of small grammar pieces that make up a sentence. I guess I don't have anything specific, but Coach Francis knows exactly what I need to be working on, and she's right there with me every time.
Yeah, it's like these little um, I understand you. It's these little words that they can change the meaning entirely of a sentence, right? The prepositions and the adjectives and the nouns and matching them up is so difficult because in English we don't have that. It's wonderful when when you finally start feeling that you are getting it right. Even though you make some mistakes, it doesn't matter. But it's just wonderful to finally be able to do something that your own language doesn't have.
Yes, I agree. And Coach Francis does a really good job of pointing out my mistakes, but she also doesn't tear apart everything. So she does that, has a really nice balance between when I need some help and sometimes just letting me speak, knowing it's not all grammatically correct.
Yes, I think that's really important. I mean, it wouldn't be. I don't think you would feel great being in a place where everything was super, 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 super strict. I mean, obviously, corrections need to be made, but there are ways and there is a balance, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Mary, I want to ask you, has there been anything about Spanish that has surprised you?
I think I've been surprised by the difference in accents, as I had mentioned earlier. It's not just like, boom, Spanish. There's this slight variation in Mexico, and this slight variation in Argentina, and this slight variation in Spain. And so I've been surprised by some things where Coach Francis has said, this in Mexico means this, but don't say this in Spain. It's offensive or something like
Right.
that. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, it's a good thing you told me. So I think it also, one thing that's been surprising is just the empathy that has grown in me toward other people who don't know English, because it's challenging to be in a situation where you don't know the language. And I can only imagine if you moved to a foreign country. I've never lived in a foreign country for a long period of time where I've been in the language minority, and it must be very challenging. So I think the empathy in me has grown.
That's super important, especially nowadays, where everybody is just in their own little world, and we lack this empathy that allows us to put ourselves in other people's shoes and value their own experiences. So I think that is essential in order to have a more peaceful world.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what are some language learning myths that you might have heard before embarking on your Spanish learning journey that you have said, this is simply not true?
I think sometimes people have alluded to the fact that adults can't learn a language. And as I told you, I was fortunate enough to start learning Spanish in kindergarten, but really only the basics. And I could have chosen when I was in my 20s to just say, well, I've learned the Spanish I have in school and I'm just done, because I didn't have as many opportunities to practice once I was out of the university. However, I feel like I was motivated to keep learning, and even as an adult, I can learn. And
Hmm.
so I think if there are adults out there who think I'm too old to start learning a language, it's much easier if you're a kid. I think it's not too late. And
Hmm.
so, even as adults, we can learn. In some ways, it might be more difficult because adults have busier schedules. They're not in school where they're immersed in a language all day and just hearing it constantly spoken to them. But I think where there's a will, there's a way. And if you really want to learn a new language, I don't think it's too late, even if you think you're too old.
You're completely right, and even though we might not have as much time as adults, I think as adults, our brain has developed more, right, and we have greater capacity of understanding and making these relationships between one language and the other. So the concepts might be a bit more clear now that we're adults. And yeah, I don't think there's ever a moment where we should limit ourselves to what we can learn.
I agree.
So, Mary, we are winding down our interview and we're getting down to the last part. And the last part is, do you want to give a shout out to Coach Francis?
I absolutely want to give a shout out to Coach Francis. I have enjoyed working with her for the past over 3 years now, and she is a wonderful teacher, a wonderful person, and I've learned and grown so much from her. So I wish everybody had the opportunity to work with Coach Francis, though, based on my experience with her, I imagine that the other coaches are also wonderful. And if anybody is wondering if Spanish 55 is for them, I would encourage them to do the free trial lesson, because that was what really got me interested. And working with Coach Francis has been a blessing, and she has just helped me become so much more confident in my ability to speak Spanish. Go, Coach Francis.
I'm sure Coach Francis will be very happy to hear that. Anything else that you would like to share, or anything that you might have thought of right now that you want other people to know?
What I've learned is that consistency pays off in many areas of life. But I think one of the best things I did was just taking the jump to try to improve my Spanish. And over 3 years have passed, and I am surprised how quickly it's gone in working with Coach Francis. And I think, yes, life gets busy, but making sure I'm prioritizing this. I meet with Coach Francis once a week, and it's just paid off so much. And so I think that Spanish 55 is such a great program because you really do get the lessons tailored to you and where you're at and your needs. And I hope to continue inspiring other people as well. I know my husband is starting to want to speak Spanish with me, and I keep encouraging him, try Spanish 55. He is using some apps right now to try to improve his Spanish, and it's going well. But I hope to continue to be an inspiration to other people through my language learning journey.
Oh, I'm sure, just as you have your mentor, I'm sure that you are an inspiration for others, and others look up to you, and they want to try to also help others as you have done. And I think that's wonderful that your husband is also on his Spanish learning journey, and I'm sure in no time he'll want to take some lessons with one of our coaches.
I hope so.
Wonderful. So, Mary, thank you so much for, this lovely chat. I enjoyed getting to know you. I enjoyed hearing about how you've had your challenges, but you've overcome them, and the self-confidence that learning this language has brought to you. And I am sure that you are going to achieve the fluency that you desire, and, use it to work with the rest of your students. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tanya. It's been a really fun conversation.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Conquering Spanish, where we heard the inspiring story of Mary Herman. Mary's story is a beautiful reminder of the connections that can be made through language learning. Her story not only shows us this beauty, but also reminds us that it's not about perfection. It's about building up the courage to communicate, to ask questions, and embrace each step going forward. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to Conquering Spanish so you wouldn't miss out on our upcoming stories just like this one. We've got more practical tips, interviews, and fun language learning content coming your way. You can also check out Spanish 55's website, where you can book your free introductory consultation. The link is down below, and make sure to follow us on social media to stay connected. Thank you once again for listening, and keep coming back so we can continue conquering Spanish together.